Oh, sorry, Member Columbus.
Yes, Mr. Biddle, you were home at the time this alarm went off?
No, I was not. My home watch person, they called and my home watch person come to meet the police.
Okay, so obviously you didn't hear any knocks on the door or anything?
No, no one was here. The home was vacant at the time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Biddle. The first one, would you please, following on from what Member Columbus has just raised, would you explain to the board the process that is followed from the point that the alarm monitoring company gets the alarm? What do they do? What instructions have you given them to do?
First they call me and then they call my wife. At the time, neither one of us had access to our phone. So we never got the call from the alarm company. So their next call is the police. At the time, we got a message. So we called our home watch guy right away, said, oh, there's something going on. And we sent him to the home, which is only a couple of minutes away from here. And at the time he came, and then he was here, and then the police met him here.
Okay.
We couldn't stop the police anymore.
Okay, thank you. And to the best of your knowledge, there was no evidence of any kind of criminal activity, forceful entry, those types of things?
No, there wasn't. I allowed them to come in the house and go. They went through the whole home. They went all around the outside, inside, and there was no disturbance anywhere. Just the alarm when they came in, it told them that all different zones were going off all over the house, not just one. They were all going off. So it's not like there was a faulty piece of alarm equipment. It was the surges that were making all different areas go off, which is very abnormal. That doesn't happen.
Okay, and subsequently, have you had the alarm company come down and review?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had them come again. I think it was 2 weeks later they came and they re-inspected and did everything. They never changed anything. They said your system is working in perfect order. We can't find any complaints or problems with it.
Thank you. And the next question is probably the most important question I'm going to ask you, and for the information of the board as well. Have you read bylaw 2020-1, and particularly the definitions portion?
Yes, I have.
And you read here that in the definitions portion, a false alarm is defined, and subsection 4, alarms activated by internal or external atmospheric conditions, vibrations, or power surges.
Exactly. And I do not agree with it.
Thank you very much. Anything further from the board members? Anything further from you, Mr. Biddle?
No further question.
Thank you very much. Commentary from the board. I'll entertain a motion. I will explain too, first, if we determine that it is in fact a false alarm, then there is no motion required. If the board wishes to determine that it was not a false alarm by definition, then we need a motion to that effect. Willie, did I see your hand?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in view of the policy and the integrity of the policy and the definitions, as you explained, I would move that we deny the appeal. I'm hoping I did the proper motion for this.
As I indicated, if it's the board's pleasure to deny the appeal, then we really don't need a motion to that effect.
Okay.
Councillor Columbus, I saw your hand.
I was going to support it as a seconder if you needed that.
Could you repeat that, please?
To support Mr. Van Houten's motion.
Councillor Santos, your views?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And looking at our policy bylaw, I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. Unfortunately, this portion of the bylaw is not in favor of Mr. Biddle, and it's clear that it definitely is a false alarm. So I'm in favor.
Thank you very much. So what we have at the present time then are a majority of the board members indicating that the alarm in fact was false and that the penalty will apply. That's the decision, Mr. Biddle.
Yeah, well, I think the whole board should sit down and revisit their bylaw. I could see it one power surge, but several in all different zones. It's not normal. One power surge probably would not do it, but several would do it. So when they come to the home and there's several alarms going off in all different areas of the home, mean that there is a problem with the electrical company or the act of God being nature that did cause the problem. But I think they should revisit that and go forward. Like, they're going to send these alarms out, these bills out for alarms that go off. And I understand there is a lot of false alarms that aren't adjustable. If their system's not right, this is no good. They get several times they come. Yes, I agree. But one of this nature to me, there's no common sense to it.
Thank you for that, sir. I will also remind the board, and in the package that you have in front of you on page 6, that community services staff reached out to Hydro One, and the response they got, there was no indication of any kind of power outage or power surge listed at that property on that day. I don't want to go too far and say that what you heard from your key holder or your person who does your home care and might have heard from the officer, that for us that's hearsay, that's secondhand information. The officer does not recall saying that at all. So the decision of the board is that it is a false alarm. That's the decision, sir.
Okay, so be it. Again, all I'm saying is I think they should revisit their bylaw.
Thank you, and thanks for participating this morning, and please keep safe.
Thank you. Robert Biddle.
Is now exiting.
Okay, gentlemen. Welcome, Monty. So we've dealt with the appeal before the board. We've done the opening necessities in terms of declaration of pecuniary interest. We'll move on to the next item. We do not have any closed session at this point. We do not have deputations in front of us. We have the approval correction of the Police Services Board meeting of May the 27th. If there are no errors, corrections, or amendments, we'll accept them as adopted. So being, thank you. Business arising from the minutes, the correspondence of Crime Stoppers of Haldeman, Norfolk, and an acknowledgement from them of the support that the board has given to them. There's a communication from Mr. John Rogers, the Turkey Point property owners, with respect to increased speeders on Cedar Street. Certainly, staff fashion, you'll take that under advisement, as you always have been, sir, and always have done.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I've reviewed that, and actually, our mobile sign's currently in Long Point, and we'll be moving it next week to Turkey Point.
Thank you very much for that. I'll have more to say on speeding when I make my comments later on. And before we get to the monthly report from the OPP, you will reflect back to May the 27th when we went in closed session and we discussed personal items about the applicants for membership on the Norfolk County Community Policing Committee. The outcome of that discussion in closed session was that pending reviews of references and those types of things, we would then make the appointments that came out of that meeting. I've been informed, we've all been informed by our admin support person, Mr. Owen Jaggert, that the references have all been checked and checked out fine. The outstanding issue is a police records check, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So the intent today is to go ahead with the appointments pending the police reference check. So that is to say, let's get them on board. If the police reference check comes back with some negative information, we'll deal with it at that time. But in getting the committee in place and getting some of the details and the meetings moving forward, particularly the first meeting where they have to have a chair and a vice chair and put their agenda together, and then what we want them to do as a board is certainly take on the review of the draft strategic plan for policing in Norfolk County. So I have a motion in front of me, and I'll need a mover and a seconder, and it reads as follows. Norfolk County Police Services Board appoint the following individuals to the Norfolk County Community Policing Committee. Rita Culver as the Ward 2 representative, Justin Corner as the Ward 3 representative, Joshua Lightheart of the Ward 4 representative, Jeanette Montgomery, we all know her as Jean, Ward 5 representative, and Alan Avery as the Ward 7 representative. It was our hope to have 2 at Ward 5. Do we know what happened? I think it was Gordon Rollo, was it not? I can't recall correctly. However, and the following members at large: Michelle Huff, Brenda Paraki, Gordon Rollo, Melvin Thompson, with a P, Thompson, Reginald Van Nieuwenberg, Van Demberg, sorry, I'll get that correct. Demberg, thank you. And Harold Kerr, and those are members at large. And that the electronic meeting of the Norfolk County Community Policing Committee be scheduled for early July. So they'll do a virtual meeting, I would hope, and certainly Owen Jaggert will organize that and structure that for them. And I will attend, and if anyone else here wants to attend, Owen will send all those particulars so we can zoom in, as it were, and find out what's going on. And that invitation also stands for John, for your organization as well. Whoever you appoint as their representative, as their contact. So you've heard the motion. I need a mover and a seconder, or a question, sorry.
Mr. Chair, it's good to see that this initiative by the Police Service Board is starting to take hold, and hopefully it will fill those positions and get some action across the community of Norfolk. My question is, we had, I thought there were some staggered terms that were going to be taking place with respect to this committee.
Those will be contained in the terms of reference.
Okay. So we don't know which individuals will be staggered which way yet at this point. Okay,
We'll let them sort that out.
thank you.
I would hate to dictate that on anyone. I will say too, you may have noticed in the reading of the motion that Ward 1 did not have a representative, and most recently the representative applicant for Ward 6 has withdrawn his application. I sent an email out, I think it was yesterday. Everyone should have gotten a copy of that. And I have reached out to both ward councilors and asked them to find out if they can target a representative in their communities and then bring it forward to Owen. Owen has sent out the terms of reference, so they should know who they're looking for. George.
So, Mr. Chair, just to confirm, so Port Rowan has no representative, and my understanding, Port Dover. Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ward 1, I don't want to say Port Rowan because Ward 1 is much larger than that, and Ward 6 as well do not have representatives at this time. Okay, need a mover and a seconder? Willie?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd move the motion and certainly commend those who put their names forward for that, and we certainly appreciate their help.
Seconder? Any further comment? All in favor? Unanimous, thank you. If you want to get the correct spelling and those names and everything else, Owen will have that for you. Okay. That then takes us to the monthly report and Staff Sergeant Fashing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report, it will be for the month of May 2020. I'll start with overtime. Dollars spent year to date on overtime is $98,939.95, which equates to 23.38% of our budget. In May, we had 70 total auxiliary hours. It's still limited somewhat due to COVID-19 policy, so those hours were primarily administrative.
Can you comment, please, staff, on any issue that is keeping the overtime to that level?
I think we've been fortunate in that we've been staffed well throughout the COVID process. We've reallocated frontline resources from other units to ensure that we're staffed on platoons to deal with the pressures of calls for service as well as staffing. So it's helped us in terms of a reduction this year over last year. In terms of correspondence, I have the Crime Stoppers report for May. Year to date, there's been 253 tips that have come in. Activity's been somewhat limited for Crime Stoppers as well due to the circumstances surrounding COVID. They have sent out bursary applications to all the high schools in Haltom and Norfolk. The submissions have been received, and they're just currently deciding on successful applicants. They continue with some media relations, and they're writing script for Eastlink Cable. And the Grand partnerships featuring unsolved crimes for Haldeman and Norfolk. As I mentioned earlier, fundraising's been significantly impacted by COVID. They did conduct the raffle for the Big Green Egg Barbecue Smoker, which was won by a gentleman from Simcoe. And several forthcoming fundraising events have been canceled due to COVID-19. And one note here, the board is actively seeking new board members, and Neil Unwin continues to serve as president of the board.
Any questions from the members of the board on that portion?
So for May, for municipal overtime hours, we had 560.63, and for provincial hours, we had 104.63. And moving on, you all have the statistics proportion. In terms of community engagement initiatives, focus patrols, we still have open focus patrols directed for COVID-19 in Simcoe, Waterford, Townsend, Port Dover, Woodhouse, Norfolk North and Norfolk South. Those, we'll continue to have those in place likely until the provincial emergencies lifted.
At that point, staff Fashing, there's been a bit of a back and forth. One of the council members, Mr. Van Passen particularly, was inquiring about the raison d'etre, the reason behind the selection of the various sites for the speed watch sign, particularly the post-mounted ones. Could you explain the process and how those sites are determined?
That's a process that flows through the Norfolk County Traffic Safety Committee, of which the OPP is a member, as well as staff from Norfolk County, including roads and engineering. Essentially, the process is based on analysis, and that analysis includes speed spy studies, motor vehicle collision locations, and it takes into account complaints received from the public through our office or through the Police Services Board. So we take those in totality to determine where they'll be most effective.
Thank you, and we did, I think I copied everyone on the response from Mr. Sean Van Acker, and Councillor Van Passen was pleased to get that information. With respect to speeding, I'll mention this briefly right now, but I do have more to say. I've engaged with the assistant to the mayor, and any complaints that come in are sent to me relative to police activity, police actions. We know that the uniform and the black and whites are not invisible, and people are watching all the time. But particularly, most of what I'm getting are speeding complaints. And how I handle that is if it's a straight-off complaint, they're speeding on my street, I'll pass that along to through the inspector, and it will be dealt with as they determine in terms of focus patrols or relocation of the mobile sign, however that takes. In most cases, I do copy you. In some cases, I don't. It's pretty routine. You would have received one yesterday, I think was much more wholesome and fulsome about speeding on Norfolk Street between Union and Wyndham, particularly along the front of Wellington Park. So I'll talk more about that later on. And you, staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just closed our Cottage Watch focus patrol for the season, and I'm happy to report that we had 0 incidents of break-and-enters to any seasonal residences, marinas, or trailer parks.
Reported incidents.
Reported. Correct, reported. We currently have a focus patrol open in Delhi. As Mr. Columbus will be aware, we've had some issues with the trucks on the detour route. So we continue to actively enforce there. We've put in 15 hours and we've laid over 30 charges so far related to trucks using the detour when they're not supposed to be. Speed spy studies, we've just finished one that we conducted out in County Road 21 in Wycombe. Problem was not identified. We also conducted another speed spy study on Radical Road as it comes into Nelson Street in Port Dover. And we did identify an issue there, and we will be initiating a focus patrol for that area of Nelson Street as it feeds into Radical Road.
I will say at this juncture that I did see the mobile sign there. I think we have 4 of the pole mounted situated at this point. 2 more to be put in, but the sites have been chosen. Yeah. I asked Mr. Sean Van Acker as to the status of the purchase of the next 6 because council did put that into the capital budget. And I yet to hear a response back as to the status of the purchase of those additional 6. But I don't want the committee or the group to wait for them to be purchased. Let's do the site selections as best we can, staff, okay?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and on that note, we'll be meeting, the actual Traffic Safety Committee meeting will be meeting tomorrow. As you know, we have a new engineer, and we'll be meeting with him for the first time, and we'll get him up to speed on this. Speed watch sign, we had it at Radical Road in Nelson, as Mr. Chair mentioned earlier. We had it at Cockshot Road. We have it now in Long Point. And in conjunction with the speed sign, we had a focused radar enforcement there on Monday and laid 4 charges. The speed sign will now move to Turkey Point to monitor speeds there as well. Also of note in terms of enforcement, we ran a specific motorcycle-related enforcement in Port Dover over the weekend as well, which netted us 7 charges. That involved the members from Norfolk County Detachment as well as Highway Safety Division assisting us with that.
A question from Member Columbus.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Fashion, Staff Sergeant Fashion. The Traffic Safety Committee you mentioned, your meeting tomorrow.
Yes.
James Street in Delhi, that's, there's a petition out. It's kind of a hot issue. It's not provincial, or it's a provincial highway there, that James Street from Vandenbush Irrigation to Wilson. Will that be on the docket for discussion tomorrow?
Mr. Chair, yeah, that will be a topic of discussion. We've actually reviewed a significant amount of data on it. And I can tell you, speaking for the committee, that we support that. But as you know, Mr. Columbus, there's an issue with that being a provincial highway. And that would be an issue where MTO would have to initiate and make those changes. So we'll discuss that process tomorrow and what that encompasses.
So just follow up, will your department then move it to the MTO?
We will.
Because I don't believe the county has any jurisdiction over that.
Mr. Chair, our intention would be to forward a letter of support for those changes to the MTO.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure the residents there will appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. And if you would, Mike, get back to whoever's organizing the petition and let them know that it's not falling on deaf ears. It is being taken care of. Continuing staff.
Gee, Mr. Chair, that concludes the report that I have. Open to any questions.
Okay, so if you go to page 23, certainly in the draft strategic plan, we have identified the big four as things that we want to monitor, and there are others for sure, but the big four that are identified by the OPP and that we have picked up and said we'd like to hear about them as well. Distracted driving, seat belts, ride patrol impaired, those kinds of things. So those stats are there for us. And I do want to say to our police force that while the OPP have identified them, we too have identified them, and we will be monitoring them going forward. On false alarms, which is on the next page, I'll speak more to that in a second, but I did send an email out to you folks indicating some actions that hopefully will be taken. Any questions on the report so far from members? Thank you very much, staff, and we'll accept that report. Owen? The PSB summer schedule. Historically, in finer times, we have stood down for the summer and have meetings at the call of the chair or as petitioned by the members to have a meeting. Is there any different opinion around the table at this time? Seeing none, we'll stand down for the summer. We'll reconvene in September. Owen? Unless matters come up where I believe a meeting is necessary, or if the majority of members believe a meeting is necessary and can petition me to do that. All right? Thank you. Other business. Let's go around the table. Mr. Columbus.
Yes, I got 2 items I think I'd like the Staff Sergeant to address, and we discussed it before about this collision reporting center. I know Inspector Varga had mentioned that it's being worked on. When do you anticipate something like that happening here in Norfolk?
Mr. Chair and Mr. Columbus, thank you for the question. I don't have a definitive date on that, but I can tell you the wheels are rolling on it. We had drawings sent to our office today where we could identify appropriate parking areas for tow trucks and vehicles that came into the collision reporting center. So the process has started. Unfortunately, once again with COVID, much of the administration portion of it has been delayed. So in terms of a definitive date, I can't give you one, but I do know preliminary plans have started, and we also included modifications to our building, which would be required in our facilities plan, which has gone to general headquarters for approval.
Okay. Thank you for that update. My other question is, from what I've been hearing, that recruitment of new officers is difficult. Do you have a comment on that situation and with respect to recruitment?
I think it's a challenge, but I think we are having some success as an organization now. We've put a strong focus on recruits and hiring quality recruits, and I can tell you that we are now able to send significantly more members to OPC as per our allotment as we have in the past. That's a focus. I see some positive progress there.
Great, thank you.
We do know, and my conversations with the inspector focused on Ontario Police College and the difficulties during this particular time. We were expecting, I think, one new recruit to show up soon if he or she has not already, although there is one transfer going out, so we're still short, which was the basis of the motion that was passed unanimously by this board relative to the 9 vacant positions here, and how many were in, the difficulties they're having in other locations like Haldeman and across the Western Division. The motion that we passed unanimously went forward to the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards at their AGM, and although it was a late submission, they accepted it and discussed it at that meeting. And George, I think you were on the phone call for that, or Zoom. And it was passed by a large majority to go forward. I've had lengthy conversations with the executive director, Fred Costing, and strategizing where that will go forward next. Basically, it is the municipalities paying for product and service they're not receiving. That's the basis. And the Municipal Policing Bureau is taking the monies and keeping them because they're not spending them on salaries and benefits. So the question is, what are you doing with the money? How can we leverage those dollars in some other way if you're having problems getting recruits? What can we invest in to make better policing at the front line? So that's where the discussion is going to go. Whether the Auditor General picks it up, because if you do the math pretty quickly and make some assumptions, if we're down across the Western Division, let's say 100, what's Central Division, Eastern Division, Northern Division? How do you multiply that out? How many millions of dollars are being retained by Municipal Policing Bureau, who has a budget of around $400 million, $440 million, something like that. So it's in process, it's moving forward. So, and certainly the inspector is well aware of it, and it's got nothing really to do at the local level. It's not their fault that they can't get recruits at this present time. But the strategic issue is municipalities are paying dollars for product and service we're not getting. One of the arguments that was bounced back was, well, the Police Services Act says you get adequate and effective policing. To which I retort, well, if I get adequate and effective policing and I'm 9 short, why do I need the other 9? So let's have our motion called for an open, frank, and transparent discussion on this matter. And that's all we're asking for. So, not to take too much time, but that's what the status of that. Any questions or comments? Councillor Santos, or sorry, Member Santos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to the staff sergeant here, I wanted to make note, I've noticed in the last 3 months, that the Haldeman Norfolk Crime Unit Enforcement have been doing an excellent job downtown, and of course throughout Norfolk. And as we all know, COVID-19 has kept us in our homes. So I've been doing a lot of walking over the last 3 months, and I've noticed certain individuals in town undercover making clean sweeps. So I just want you to know, Staff Sergeant, if you can pass on that their excellent work is not going unnoticed. So if you could relay the message, I'd appreciate it on behalf of Mr. Chair and the Police Services Board, that when I notice these numbers increase, it's a good sign that not only are they doing their job properly, but keeping us safe. These issues of fentanyl, all types of drugs, it's a reality. And the world is upside down, there is no doubt. And these individuals, each and every day, be it at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, are out there basically making sure that we're safe. So I want to just say thank you, Mr. Chair, on behalf of the Police Services Board, to the Staff Sergeant. If you can relay that to the individuals, be well appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. Santos, thank you for the comments. And Mr. Chair, much appreciated. We have a very dedicated team. They do an excellent job. We've been able to rededicate them now that we've moved through the most critical phase of COVID. So we hope to see some increase in activity. And in that line, I really want to mention our frontline officers that are out in these areas every day, our uniform officers that are gleaning us a great deal of information on foot patrol and dealing with these folks on a daily basis. Their teamwork and contributions are invaluable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Still under other business, other members around the table? Before I go into my little list here. Okay.
I just wanted to add to the Staff Sergeant, I know we're in a changing world, but I just want to reassure that the Norfolk OPP, on behalf of the Norfolk Police Services Board, that we appreciate the frontline officers and the work that they continue to do each and every day, taking into account COVID-19, but of course, like I said, not only with the drug enforcement, but the officers on the beat each and every day. And I noticed the stats with regards to domestic violence has increased, and a number of other things have increased. I have to definitely let them know that we want to keep their morale up. It's not easy, but we definitely have their back, and I appreciate their work. And I think we all do around this table. Correct, Mr. Chair?
100%, sir. And on that note, let me just say this. The Police Services Board is not, I repeat, is not a committee of council. Our members, our mandate comes from the Police Services Act and the regulations there too. So we don't report to council. And the members from council have to take off their council hats when they come here and be a member of this, because we have our own separate code of conduct and rules and regulations that we adhere to and follow. We have our own administrative and procedural stream that feeds into and up to the Solicitor General's Department. Similar to the Board of Health. It's not a committee of council, although Norfolk Council is the Board of Health. That confuses things. But, so I want to make that clear. And so some time ago, everyone should have received a handbook, Section 10 handbook, and it outlines the roles that we have and the mandate that we have. And I want to say this in the nicest possible way. We're here to provide oversight to our policing service through the inspector, and we are here to provide for Norfolk County the best possible policing service that we can afford. And you've heard me say triple E in the past: effective, efficient, and economical. Maybe less on the economical so much, but we're certainly efficient and effective. I will say we are not cheerleaders for the OPP, and I say that in the kindest possible way, sir. You know, we have a specific role to play between government and the police, and we should be careful how we do that. So that handbook lays it out for everybody. And and the code of conduct as well. That's part of the Police Services Act and the regulations there too. I want to give a shout out to the OPP this morning, as you have already, Mr. Santos, and that is yesterday's Simcoe Reformer and Ed Sanchuk, Constable Ed Sanchuk, reinforcing the issue. The OPP are not dog catchers. They're not chasing barking dogs. They don't care if your neighbor's making noise in the daytime. That's not their role. Garbage in the ditch, that's not their role. And I know you're getting these calls. And I can only reinforce that these are bylaw issues. And I impress upon the inspector time after time. There is a phone number and an email address for bylaw. And I encourage our police service to deflect all those things. Deflect them, right to bylaw. Even if bylaw doesn't get around to them for a day or two, deflect them. They're not our role. Until such time as we conclude the negotiations and discussions that we have with Norfolk County in terms of what bylaws do they want the police service to enforce and when. That's been all held in abeyance because of the situation that we currently have. But I just want to reinforce take that kind of workload off the desk and let's apply those valuable hours and those talented people to frontline crime prevention and law enforcement. And that's the message I want to send out clear, as clear as possible. Is there any comment on that? Okay. Speeding was mentioned earlier, and some of the more involved cases, when the weather's good, I go for a walk. I walk from my place up in the hill there, downtown and around, and back up the hill. And I meet people, and I chat with people. And I was stopped by two folks that live on Norfolk Street, and they had communicated with their counselors and had not heard back. And it was about speeding, that place from Union Street, the post office, up to Wyndham. And I said, well, I will certainly pass it along as an issue for the possible enforcement, focus patrol, whatever it might be. And I did that, and I copied both counselors, Ward 5. I did get a response from one of those counselors, and I had to explain, sorry, not I had to explain, I explained the different roles between the PSB and council. We've had this before, Mike, in terms of St. John's Road and the line painting. That's not the PSB's role. We can identify these things. It's the county's role to put in flashing lights, do their studies and reduce the speed limit, do whatever traffic calming measures that can possibly put in place, such as line painting. That's the county's role. Our role is to see if we can enforce the laws which exist, particularly under the Highway Traffic Act in this case. So you would have received a pretty lengthy response to Mrs. Gare on that issue, or Ms. Gare on that issue. So I've set up the process so the complaints come here, we deal with the complaints, but we bounce it back in terms of any traffic calming measures that might be in effect and whatnot. And I'm sure that what used to be called the collision committee or whatever it is, deals with it at that place as well. So Ms. Gare was very appreciative that there was some enforcement taking place on Norfolk Street. Thank you very much, staff. I don't know if you have any statistics yet on numbers there, but having said that, she was very appreciative of that. But I reminded her that the police cannot be everywhere all the time. Any comment at all, sir?
Fortunately, Mr. Chair, I don't have any statistics for that.
Thank you very much. I said a bit about police involvement in health calls, and I know it's important. I know they get the calls, but fundamentally, health people should be going to health calls. And as I said earlier, I see a lack of cohesion and cooperation, starting at the Lynn or even the ministry and coming down through. So hopefully, the county will pick up the requirement and engage everyone in terms of the community safety and well-being plan. And I think at that table, all of these things will become apparent and perhaps solutions can be found. And I do applaud the police for their reacting to these issues and the partnership that's been formed with some of the health providers in that sense. I'm not sure if the Canadian Mental Health Association is engaged there at all, and I think they are. But there are a number of groups that are not part of government that also have to be at the table, and that's what the development of that plan will do, bring all these partners to the table so we can have an open and transparent discussion on the issues. And also you received an email from me, a copy of an email anyway, on false alarms. And we dealt with one this morning, the very first appeal under the new bylaw. And you were given some statistics, and they're contained in what the OPP report to us, but more fundamentally, the Community Services Division provides us with statistics, and I asked for them. And where in the past we had an average of 66 false alarm calls per month, we have managed under this new bylaw to reduce that number by almost 2/3. So I've asked the staff of Community Services to engage with finance to see if a special reserve fund, and there's a difference between a reserve and a reserve fund. A reserve is you can move monies around and use it for other things. A reserve fund is specifically for one use, like water and wastewater. That's a reserve fund. So I've asked them to set up, if they can, a reserve fund so that the invoiced amounts for false alarms can be dumped into that reserve fund and then utilized by the Police Services Board for frontline policing issues, whether it's new speed watch signs or any other devices that we can think of to address the issues that we're having. So staff are looking into that. For the public record, and it's not a secret, there were 74 false alarms that were invoiced over the last 3 months, March, April, May. Whereas before we used to have 66 in 1 month, over the last 3 months, we've had 74. No, hang on a minute. Yeah. My memory's failing me. So there's about $14,000 that's been invoiced. And rather than go to the Norfolk County Council at budget time every year and say, oh, please give us some money for this and give us some money for that, we could then, in this reserve fund, have the availability to draw upon that and get it off the levy. So I think it's logical. I think it makes sense, so we'll just see where that goes. Any questions or comments on that from the board members? Okay, so those are the things I've covered. I wanted to cover this morning. Santos.
If I may, Mr. Chair, further to the email that you sent out, it was my understanding that there were individuals paying the fine, and the fines for the last 3 months tallied up to almost $15,000. Is that correct?
That amount has been invoiced. I don't know how much has come in.
Okay.
The process is if they don't pay it, then it will go on their property taxes.
So, Mr. Chair, under your leadership, and I know you've been a force with regards to diverting these false alarms from the OPP and dealing with it municipally, so I applaud you in that regard. I would like to see these monies definitely go towards crime prevention. And at the same time, I did mention back in January of 2020 of possibly having scholarships. Now, we're in some changing times with regards to policing, and this is not only here in Canada, worldwide, I would like to see some positive reinforcement to the youth if they're planning to take law and security. And I would ask if our staff sergeant has any ideas. I know I mentioned 4 community police officers that have worked in the OPP over the last 30 years that have made a significant change here in Norfolk County. I mean, at one time it was Haldeman, Norfolk, but of course Norfolk. So I want them, or Mr. Chair, if you can relay that to Norfolk staff, that I would like to see that if it's possible. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do recall that conversation, George, and I would like to, while it's a great idea, I'd like to hold it in abeyance, and then once we have a resolution as to what monies are available to us, and if these monies can be put into that reserve fund, then we have a lot of flexibility to actually then address those issues. And I didn't mean it to, my comments to mean that we would look at only equipment, but also crime reduction issues as well, and if so, sponsoring folks who are taking policing as a career. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, in all due respect, I'd like to see it sooner than later. And the reason being is, I mean, we have graduations that are going to be taking place this fall that we're supposed to take precedence back in June, but unfortunately because of COVID-19. So I would like to know if there's enough money in the budget at this point in time to set aside $250 per high school for this venture.
Thank you for that. And what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, and if you will agree, is have Owen send out what our status is in terms of the bank account, and ask you, sir, to send a memo through Owen to the board with your proposal in terms of how much, what areas you want to cover, like all the high schools, that type of thing, if you don't mind. So that I don't want to spring it on the board today and have the discussion and make a decision. I want us to have a more in-depth discussion about it. And I can tell you I favor it, but I want to see the detail.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With pleasure, I will do that. And hopefully in September, we'll have something to put forth. Thank you.
Yeah, and we can deal with it offline. And I mean, we can have a virtual meeting at any point if we want to get that through prior to September. I do recall going to a number of graduation ceremonies and bursaries were handed out. I just can't remember the time of year it was. Whether Fanshawe was one, and certainly all the high schools were another. Mike, I'm sure you attended Del High. So if you would send something in terms of a short proposal to us, we'll get Owen to inform everybody about our status in the bank account, and we'll take it from there. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to Councillor Columbus and to Willie, the provincial member, the deal basically is to hit all 5 high schools, and Mr. Chair, and also to the staff sergeant. And the reason I say all 5 high schools is because we have to encompass Norfolk County. And I would think that there is at least one individual in each high school that would look at this scholarship and possibly look at law and security. Thank you.
What about Fanshawe?
Fanshawe is definitely a good idea, but I know locally there really isn't anything for law and security. Is there, Mr. Chair?
Well, they'd have to go to London, but that doesn't preclude somebody from Norfolk going to London to do it.
We'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, this $14,800 or so from 74 false alarm charges. Right now, of course, we probably haven't collected it all, but who actually owns that billing, that dollar? Is it the county? Does the OPP have it right now? The court system, or the PSB?
Those monies are collected by community services and put into the Norfolk County coffers.
Okay, so I would say that there's got to be, we have to have a lot more discussion at the council level, Norfolk County Council level, with respect to that issue right now.
Yeah, certainly Norfolk County has the responsibility and authority to establish reserve funds, so it will go to that table. I just wanted to lay out the background and the detail that it's our bylaw, Police Services Board bylaw, and those funds are as a result of our bylaw, and I'm proposing that we have the ability to use them for Police Services Board purposes. Simple as that.
Thank you.
Anything further from board members under other business? Anything from you, Owen, that we have to be aware of?
No.
Thank you. Question period. Mr. Sonnenberg.
Testing. Check 1, 2. Okay. All right. Just a question for Councillor Columbus, please. I believe Staff Sergeant Fashing mentioned there was 30 charges in Delhi with regard to that detour involving the King Street construction project. That's the comment I heard. What are the side streets, Mike, that are not part of that detour route that are being impacted by the heavy truck traffic?
Right. The Western Avenue in Delhi is the no-truck route. However, a great many trucks have been, during the reconstruction of King Street, have been sliding through, going down that no-truck route. And it's very much upsetting to the residents on Western Avenue.
Okay.
Also, there's the Talbot Road, or Talbot Street, which is carrying a lot of westbound traffic rather than going through King Street. And the same thing, every morning there's a lot of large heavy trucks, tankers, taking that route, which they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be taking a different route through Lindock and up to, which road is that?
It'd be County Road 16 up to up County Road 16, actually all the way back to Highway 3. So through Rhineland and then to Highway 3.
Yeah. So that's been an issue. It's a residential area. The reconstruction of King Street is taking a tremendous amount of time, and it's certainly affecting the residents that live on those two streets.
Right. And the designated detour route for truck traffic, again, is they're being directed to go by way of Lindock Road to County Road 16 up Rhineland Road, basically, to Highway 3. And with regard to any sort of like detour routes that are acceptable for cars going through Delhi, what's the allowable streets to use?
The cars are okay. The detour route for cars is actually permitted on Western Avenue
Okay. Okay, very good.
and Talbot Road, but not heavy trucks.
Okay. Thank you. And this is a question for Staff Sergeant Fashing. You mentioned that this weekend the OPP pressed 7 charges involving motorcycles in Port Dover on the weekend. What were the nature of those charges, please?
Generally, they were incidents related to speeding.
Okay. All righty. And Chairman Trevally, I was wondering if you could just very briefly describe once more what we hope to achieve with a county-wide policing committee and why that model was attractive to the Police Services Board and why we decided to go with that, and what we hope to achieve with a county-wide community policing body like that.
Thank you for the question, Monty. Yeah, a little history. When I first sat in this chair as the mayor, we had 11 communities that had policing committees. By the time I left the chair in 2014, we were down to 5. So for a number of reasons, but not the least being volunteer burnout. So the discussion then centered on, well, how do we have an inclusive look at the requirements across Norfolk, those missing 6 communities that now were no longer covered, and other areas of the county. So the approach was to have at least one representative from each ward that would do two things. One is bring concerns up to the Police Services Board, and two, the Police Services Board could communicate down to them as to what options they have available, things that perhaps were being targeted, and get community input. So they would become a lightning rod, for the lack of a better word, in their community. Plus, the committee is formed of 12 volunteers. So if we have 7 representing wards, then we have another 5 that are at large. One of those is an individual who runs Project Life Safety. John, help me out here.
Project Lifesaver.
Saver, thank you. And that's a program that's run by Michelle Huff out of Crescent Care in Cortland. And that's where people with Alzheimer's, brain damage, people who tend to wander, wear a device, and if they do wander away and are lost, they can be quickly tracked and found. And my conversations with her, I'd like to see that expanded more greater than it is right now. And one of the others that are at large, Brenda Paraki, assisted in that program, particularly in the Waterford area, although she lives in Ward 3 area. So she still wanted to stay on, but not as a ward representative. So back to the strategic level, the idea is then to have a representative all across Norfolk and each of the wards, not communities, wards, to bubble up concerns and to take back messages from policing and police services board. Is that good?
That's great. Thank you very much. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so question period is concluded, we don't have any operational issues. I talked to the inspector, unless you have something, sir? No?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So there's no need for us to go in camera at this point. And a motion then to recess? No, terminate this meeting. Councilor Santos, or sorry, Member Santos, second. Member Willie, you got that? Members, all in favor? There. Thank you very much. Meeting is concluded. Well, I'm setting the bar pretty high for the next, person who sits here. Well, I always have, and I continue to believe in it, but I do want to say, I'm not going to be here forever. And if you think there's another person out there who wants to sit in this chair, believe me, and I'm not